Hi everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Vicky. I sometimes appear on the Premature, Menopause and POF Facebook pages. I just wanted to let you know because I posted a little while ago that I was a bit frightened of having an endometrial biopsy and hysteroscopy. Uh, and actually, I had that yesterday, and I just wanted to share my experience because I realised how common it is that people have been asked to have this done. So I thought I'd share with you my experience. I'll be honest, it wasn't all completely pleasant, but it was the experience was better than what I was worried about. So I thought it might reassure some people. I actually had mine done under general anaesthetic. So a lot of people have been told that they'll have it under local, and unfortunately, I can't really speak about that experience because that's not how I had it. The reason why I had mine under general was I think if I'd have just have been having the hysteroscopy and endometrial biopsy, so yeah, sorry, rewind back. I think if I was just having the hysteroscopy, I probably would have had it as a local anaesthetic. But because I was having a biopsy at the same time, they offered me a general. They didn't really discuss local with me very much, to be honest. It was kind of an assumption I'd have a general. So just a bit of background. I'm diagnosed with premature ovarian failure or POF. It's since the age of 25 I've been diagnosed. I'm 20, nearly 29 now. And my premature, I've been pretty much told I am in premature menopause since the age of about 23. So I had a contraceptive implant that masked the fact that I wasn't having any natural periods because I thought that was just part of the contraception. When I had it taken out, I didn't have any periods for about 6 months or so, and then I started to get investigated. I had lots of menopausal symptoms like horrible night sweats and all sorts. The couple of years before, which I had written off as other things. I do have, if anybody's interested, I do have an old blog that I started called the Premature Menopause Project on a YouTube channel. And I'll admit I haven't posted in there for a long time because at the time I started the blog, I wasn't really emotionally ready to talk about a lot of stuff. I've kind of given it more consideration lately and decided I'd like to try again and try and start it up again now that I've got a bit more space for my diagnosis. So if you are interested in more background as to my particular case of POF, you might be able to find some information from my videos, which will take you through things like how I was diagnosed, the background. I feel quite a lot differently about things now, a few years on, than what I would have done when I first did those videos. It's kind of takes some of the, I guess, more depressing side of things with a little bit more pinch of salt because it does start to feel better. But I thought you might be interested to know that's out there. So back to the biopsy. I mean, the reason why essentially I was having one was because I've been, after a few chops and changes on my HRT, I've actually found a HRT that worked, regime that had been working very well for me, which was Everall 75 patches changed twice a week for my estrogen, and Utrogestin for my tablets, 100 milligrams for my progestogen element, which I take I take a tablet from day 1 to 25, and then 25 to 28 I have a 3-day break, and then I start a pack again. For a long time it alleviated a lot of the side effects I'd been having with other forms of HRT that I hadn't got on with as well. So I had a lot of problems with Femiston and really severe cramping and breast pain. That had gone. I'd been doing really well for about a year and a half, and then about 6 months ago I started having some strange things to do with my periods. So I didn't think much of it at the time because I knew I was on HRT and the periods were synthetic. But I should have been having a bleed in the break. So 1 second. I'm just waiting for somebody to come over, so I'm just checking that I'm not missing any messages, sorry. So I should have been having sort of one bleed in the break, so in between the time that I wasn't taking progestogen before, and that should have been my natural period. It actually so happened that I was more commonly getting a bleed about a week or so back into when I started taking it again, and it was only fairly recently at a support group I go to at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, which isn't my consultants hospital, but it's a group that I was going to. It was the first time I spoke to a gynecologist. I'd never been put in touch with one before, and she said that really you should be you should be seeing a gynecologist, and you shouldn't really be bleeding. That's an odd place to be bleeding. And then I mentioned that actually in the last few months I'd had 2 periods, so I'd been having one in the break and another one later on. And she said, no, that's definitely not right. You need to get that checked out. So I kind of in the back of my head planned to talk about it. Didn't think it was that urgent. I then, over the last 8 weeks, probably more like the last 10 weeks, I've had about 7 periods, one of which was very heavy, which is about 12 to 14 days long, which is quite unusual for me. My normal is about 5 to 7 days on HRT. Obviously, it's slightly different to what my natural periods used to be like. And I was not having much break between them. I was feeling really, really tired. It actually turned out I wasn't anemic. I had quite a lot of blood tests and it didn't come up with anything I was expecting like that. But they classed it as abnormal bleeding because of the frequency. It wasn't so heavy that I was absolutely passing out with pain or, really in a mess. But it was, think about kind of a heavy period. That's how it was most times, with some occasions when it was more like an average period, but it had cramping. It definitely was more than spotting, and I was getting concerned. I've been doing all sorts of things lately to try to make myself feel a bit better, like trying to eat healthier and doing some exercise, but because of other stuff going on at the moment, it's been quite hard for me to kind of keep the willpower. But anyhow, they decided after seeing a gynecologist, I saw a gynecologist at my kind of local hospital, who I have to say was really good, and it felt like such a relief to finally see somebody that kind of understood that side of things better. And she spoke to a senior consultant, and they decided that I should have a biopsy because when you're in premature menopause, they should treat any abnormal bleeding, especially outside of what you'd expect in your HRT, as abnormal bleeding for postmenopausal women, regardless of your age. And if postmenopausal women of normal, or should I say typical age, experience that would be a cause for concern for their GP. So they follow the same procedure. They did do some tests like a transvaginal ultrasound, which seemed to show that my womb lining was too thick. It was about 5.6 millimetres. So I was booked into hospital for a hysteroscopy, which is when they insert from what I understand, a very small camera vaginally, and that takes a look at your womb, at your reproductive organs, and that's a way for them to tell if anything particular is going on, like polyps or fibroids or anything that would say to them there might be a growth there that could be precancerous or cancerous. Obviously, not everything comes up on a transvaginal ultrasound. Quite often, ultrasound images aren't great at picking up things like cysts and fibroids, so it's better that they go in and actually take a closer look. And then at the same time, I had an endometrial biopsy, which again, from what I understand, they have some kind of suction tube that they take a very small sample from. And that's what gets sent to the lab to actually get screened for whether or not there's any precancerous or cancerous cells or any form of an infection that you need to be aware of. So it all happened very quickly, actually. From the week that I saw the consultant, I was supposed to have an operation in 2 weeks' time. It actually ended up being 1 week's time because they moved it forward. Just because of scheduling and things like that. So I went to hospital yesterday. I was really, really nervous because I've never had general anaesthetic before. Obviously I was concerned about the procedure, but I have some irrational anxieties about general anaesthetic, and I was getting myself a bit worked up about it. Everyone kept telling me it would be fine, but you just don't believe people when that's you and when you're worried about it. But I can honestly say now that all the information people told me about what it would feel like was what it felt like. So went into hospital. I was in the morning surgery slot, but when I was kind of settled in a bed with one of their glamorous hospital gowns. And then when I was settled in, obviously I had nurses coming in and out, checking blood pressure a few times, gave me my surgery stockings and stuff like that. But I also had the gynecological consultant come and visit me. She reassured me a bit because she said that actually in a woman of my age, and from what they know so far, it seemed unlikely anything much was going on, but that it would be kind of a precaution. she did say that if you haven't had, like me, if you haven't had a child before and you haven't been in labour, it can be difficult for them to get into the womb for a sample because I guess everything's a bit tighter. So she had to give me this medicine, no idea what it was, but she had to give me some medicine to try to soften my womb a little bit so it would be easy for them to take the sample. So with that in mind, they had to leave me till the end of the surgery schedule. So I didn't actually get called into theatre until about midday, just after midday. So I went in, I was quite apprehensive when I went to the recovery ward. So I spent a few minutes, probably about 10 minutes on the recovery ward, which is another ward they sort of wheel you to before you actually go into theatre. That's when I started getting quite panicky. And they were really friendly, really nice. For those of you that are in the Essex area, it was at the Queen's Hospital in Romford, and they get quite bad reviews and bad press about other things, but I honestly have to say their gynecology department's really, really good, and their day surgery unit's good as well. So they kind of reassured me a bit. I was wheeled into theatre. There was a slide I was sort of put on this bed. It was a bit embarrassing because I was bleeding at the time, so I had to put this massive kind of what looked like a puppy training pad underneath my bed so that I wouldn't make a mess. That's the thing, if you're going for anything like this, it might sound obvious, but don't wear tampons. You should be wearing sanitary towels. And I forgot to say that the junior doctor that came round with a consultant actually suggested that the mirena coil would be a good option for me to have inserted, because it can be quite painful apparently to have it done usually. So if they could get that done while they were there, it would stop me having the discomfort of that. Doctors, I think I'm not sure that you'd get much anaesthetic to do with that. So I decided, go for it. I'd had that mentioned to me before as a possible, but because I'd heard about some of the pain with it being inserted, I was a bit apprehensive. Also, it's a contraception. I mean, for me, it's a little bit irrelevant because I know with my particular diagnosis, I don't have any egg follicles left, which would make me able to be pregnant. But if you're somebody with POF with some egg follicles, with some chance of natural fertility, it might be a consideration that you'd think longer about. I know that, I'm not likely to be, very unlikely to get pregnant naturally. So it was something that isn't quite as poignant for me as it might be for other people. So I agreed to that. So I went on the theatre. I remember them explaining to me that they would shortly begin. They inserted kind of the drip into one of my hands. Didn't work in the first hand because they couldn't find a vein, which always seems to be a problem with me. But then they managed on the other side. Put something on to the pads on to check my ECG, the heart monitor thing, which is how they tell, obviously they tell that you're not responding badly to any pain or anything. And then I couldn't tell you the names of what they gave me, but they kind of put a kind of gas mask on me. I think that was just oxygen. Oh no, it wasn't just oxygen, it was something else because it made me feel really woozy. It was a bit like when you're really drunk and when you get into bed and the room's spinning a bit and you're trying to kind of stay awake but you can't. Felt a little bit of a sort of underwater feeling, and it was quite pleasant actually. It wasn't kind of scary. It was quite pleasant because you're on this nice comfortable bed and there kind of lots of people reassuring you, so it was lovely. Just checking the time. And then they did put in my drip, and that's when he said, this is really painful. This is what I think I'm getting confused on because it does affect your memory. So actually thinking about it, I'm not sure that it was the thing over I think that may have been just oxygen. Actually, I think it was whatever the liquid was that was going through my drip was what actually made me feel woozy. But within a minute of him saying, it's really strong, it was noticeable. That was the only thing. It was this sort of reasonably sudden feeling of feeling quite out of it, because before I went in I thought I couldn't quite believe how anything, what if I don't fall asleep, I can't imagine it. You don't kind of imagine how that could work, but within, I was really, really fighting to keep my eyes open. Now, I know they normally say that they ask you to count down from 10 or something, so I don't know if they asked me to do that, but from everything I can remember leading up to it, I don't remember them telling me to count or anything, but I could have just blanked that out. So before I'd gone into surgery, when I was on the ward kind of waiting, I'd noticed that the women would go down for surgery and they'd be about an hour and then they'd come back and they'd stay about an hour. So I was expecting to kind of be done about 2:00 or something, but I was a bit longer than that. So this is what I don't remember. So I came when I came round, it was a bit weird. It was like a kind of, you sort of, you know, when maybe you've been ill and you're really, really tired and you're trying to stay awake and listen to what someone's saying, but you're just too tired. So things appear like in patches. So it feels like things are happening at the same time, but I think that they were probably an hour or so apart. So I remember something around when I must have first woken up, someone saying, "Oh, Vicky," and then I sort of jumped to remembering the doctor telling me how the operation went, but I didn't take in a lot of what she said because I was out of it. So I asked to talk to her again later on the phone, and I'd recommend that because for some reason they tell you how the operation went at a really weird time when it doesn't make much sense, when you're not really with it. So do ask to talk to them again if you need to. I'm not usually very insistent with stuff like that, but I was this time. And then I think they were just waiting for beds in the other ward, which was the delay. So I kind of kept falling in and out of sleep. The nurse did offer me a sip of water or two, but not a lot because obviously you can't because of the anaesthetic, you might vomit. And it kind of got to about 4 o'clock when I came round a little bit easier, and I remember, you know, she was sort of struggling to get me back to the ward because they weren't responding to her calls. It wasn't pleasant when I woke up. It wasn't a sudden feeling, and it wasn't anything completely unbearable by any means. But I did have a lot of cramping, quite severe cramping, more than I've probably experienced before. I had times on Femiston when I'd had really bad cramping. I'd had to go to the emergency doctor because it was quite bad. So it was a little bit along those lines, and they asked me to rate pain. It's obviously not going to be as painful as like childbirth or anything. 1 second, 1 second. Sorry, this is really weird. I'm having to text someone at the same time. Sorry. I've only got a few minutes left, but you know, it's not as painful as, you know, shouldn't be in excruciating pain, but it is quite noticeable. So she gave me about 5 times, she gave me little kind of snippets of this pain relief drug. It works short term. They explained it's a very short term thing, so it was kind of helping me feel better for a bit, then it would come back on. So she did that about 5 times for me, and they were going to give me a little bit of morphine, but it kind of helped. After about the 4th or 5th one she gave me, it started to ease off. I then went to the recovery ward. I then came from the recovery ward back to the original ward. I was feeling quite in pain, and I did feel very, very, very sleepy yesterday. When I came home, I slept for hours and hours and hours, and woke up a little bit towards the evening, sort of late night, and had a couple of hours where I sat up and read a magazine and then went back to sleep. But it really was I was really, really knocked out and quite disorientated as well. The cramping felt a little bit better by the time I left hospital, but it was you sort of feel quite, you have to walk quite slowly, you kind of feel it hurts quite a lot. And my legs were wobbly. By the time I got home, I just wanted to sleep. I was having quite bad cramping still, so I took a lot of Nurofen. Nurofen, if I'm honest, didn't do an awful lot, but fast forward to this morning, I've had hours and hours of sleep and I actually feel a lot better. I've got some cramping, but nothing. So realistically, it's about a day, probably a day of feeling in quite bad cramping on the day, and then the day after just feeling quite tired and needing to take it a bit easy. In terms of how it went, I was told, so I have to hurry up because someone's coming in a minute, but in terms of how it went, I was told that they couldn't find any abnormalities from the camera. They struggled to get a sample, which is actually quite a good sign because it shows that there wasn't any growth. They're going to send that off. If it comes back as insufficient sample, they said that actually wouldn't concern them because that would kind of reinforce that there isn't anything there. But they are going to write to me in a couple of weeks to let me know. I think some of the cramping was to do with the coil. I think I kind of get the feeling from reading other people's experiences that if it hadn't have been for me having the coil, I probably wouldn't have been in quite as much pain because my sister-in-law had that done. And she said that she found that really quite uncomfortable for a few days. So maybe some of that can be explained by that. So I guess this message is just to give you a realistic idea of what it feels like for anybody that's ever worried in the future. I'll try and post another video to let you know about when I get my results. But yeah, so just wanted to give you a realistic account, but a reassuring account. And if anybody does want my opinion or wants to talk to me further, feel free to inbox me on Messenger, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm always a little bit slow responding on Messenger, but I will respond. So don't be afraid to contact me. But thanks very much. I just wanted to update you, and just in case that's ever of any help to anybody. Thank you. Bye.